Hey guys, welcome back. Now in this episode, I'm going to continue one of the series that I've posted for a while, and that is nothing but AppSync and Serverless series. So that series has been on pause for some time. We released about 3 videos, and then because there were less interaction, we had to pause it and move it to some other videos. But now that we got a lot of requests to continue that series, so this video is about the next episode of it. All right, so before we continue today, I want to give a quick recap on what we have covered so far. Because we released 3 videos and we were building AppSync API from scratch using serverless framework. And also we are going to use Amplify library to interact with the backend AppSync API. So let's get started with a recap and then continue with today's episode. Alright guys, so the code can be found here in this GitHub repository. So I'll put the link in the description. So you guys can go ahead and clone this repository. In fact, I did clone to a new directory. So when you clone it, you should see a backend folder. And inside that, I have initiated a serverless project in the very first video. And also, I went ahead and created all the resources that is required for our online bookstore application. You can find all the resources in the resource.yml file, which is this one. And there we went ahead and created a book table, order table. Now these are both DynamoDB tables, as you can see. And this is the order table. And there we went ahead and provisioned the global secondary indexes as well. So also to connect to our backend, we need to have some user registration. And we need to register our user in a user pool. So we went ahead and created a Cognito user pool. And also we created a Cognito user pool client so that our front-end application or a web applications can easily use this Cognito user pool client to connect to our user pool. And also in our user pool, we created a different user groups. So here this user group is related to the customers. So we have a custom user group, and this custom user group has its own permissions. So that's where we use a IAM role for the customers. For example, this IAM role only allow customers to read the books and create orders, but they cannot go ahead and create books, and that is only available for the users in the admin group. So that's why we created this admin group here. And this is the admin group related IAM role. So the admin users really, they can create books and also they can view orders that the customers have made, and it is more permissive because they should be able to create books. So that's why we have given all the permission for the admin users to create books and also interact with the order table. So this we did in the very first video. And after that, in the second video, we went ahead and used Serverless AppSync plugin to create our AppSync API. So as the first step, we installed this AppSync plugin, and then we started provisioning some configuration under custom section. We gave it a name, and also we set the authorization type or the authentication type to Amazon Cognito user pool, because we already created a user pool for our users. And then we created some data sources. So our AppSync API can fetch data from a DynamoDB table. So the DynamoDB data source that we created is a books table. And we implemented one query, that is get book by ID, and one mutation, that is creating books. Now these two are already implemented in the episode number 3. And if we go to schema.graphql, there are more queries than get book by ID. But at the moment, we have only created or implemented really get book by ID query. And there are other queries to list all the books in the bookstore and also to list all the orders that a customer has made, so he can view his own orders. And also we have set of mutations. At the moment we created only or implemented only this mutation, that is creating book. But we need to create the create order mutation as well. And then we went ahead and deploy all these resources, including our backend databases as well as the AppSync API with the AppSync schema or the GraphQL schema. And then we could see our AppSync API in the AppSync section in AWS console. So this is our AppSync API. So if I go there and if I go to the queries section, I can start creating my books using the create book mutation, and also I can get a book using my get book by ID query. And if you go to the data sources section, you should see the DynamoDB table that we created as a data source for AppSync API. Now I can open it. Here it is. So that is the books table. And at the moment I have a couple of books added. These 2 books has been added. So let's add a new book. I will go to the queries section again, and the new book I'm going to add is, let's say, the Think and Grow Rich book by Napoleon Hill. So I pass the author name, some description, the price of it, and the title, and then I will execute this mutation. But before I run the play button, I need to log in because we added authentication with user pool. So let me go ahead and log in. Now, in order to create books, guys, we need to log in as an admin. So let me use one of my admin account. So this is an admin user. So let's log in. Now let me go ahead and execute this mutation. Then the book got created and we are returned with the attributes. Now if I go to the DynamoDB table and do a refresh, I should see the 3rd book, which is this one. Nice. Then I will get the book ID, and let's use our query to get the book. We have a parameter book ID, so let me place it there and let's run this query. So it should return the book. Very nice. But if I am logged in as a user, then I'm not able to create books. Let me quickly show you that as well. Right, so I'm now logged in as a user. Let me create the same book again, but it should not let me do that. It should throw an unauthorized exception. Here we go. Not authorized to access create book mutation, because I'm a user and that is unauthorized. How we did that? So I have used AppSync directives or decorations. So here I used AWS _auth decoration for create book, and I allowed only the people in the admin group to access this mutation or work with this mutation. That's why the user who is not in the admin group couldn't create the book. But of course, he can view the book. Let me try to execute the query. So I'll execute it, this time with the query. The parameter is invalid because I need to add the book ID. So let me grab that book ID real fast. Go back, paste it, and execute the query. Then, even though I'm the user, I can view all the books. So this is what we have done so far in the first 10, second and third videos, and I'll put the links for all those videos. So if you guys need a step-by-step instructions how to do this, you can follow along and then continue with this video. Okay, so now that you have an understanding about what we have done so far, what are we going to do in this video? So in this video, we are going to connect to our backend AppSync API that we have already created using a front end. Now, as for the front end, I'm going to use a React front end, and I'm going to connect to our AppSync API that is already created using Amplify library. Now remember guys, we did not use Amplify CLI to create our backend. So we need to treat our backend, the AppSync API, as an already existing AppSync API and configure our Amplify library to connect to an existing AppSync API. So let's see how to do those configuration and connect to our AppSync API using React and Amplify library. Alright guys, so let's start by creating a folder for front-end code. I'll just add front-end. Yeah, and I will go into that folder, cd front-end, and I will go ahead and create a React project because we are going to use React for our front-end. I will use npx create React app bookstore. So while it is being creating, I went ahead and searched for Amplify docs, and then I will go to the first link, Amplify framework documentation. Alright, so here we are going to use Amplify library guys. So I will click here and open the AWS Amplify library documentation. And here I will select JavaScript, which is the default selection. Now first we need to provide a login for our front-end app. Because as you can remember, when you were testing it using the AppSync console, we had to log in. So user login is a must at the moment because we added user pool authentication to our AppSync API. Remember, Amazon Cognito user pool as an authentication type. So we'll start by adding a login screen to our app. So here I will go to authentication section. You can click here and then click getting started. Now you can scroll a little bit down to configure your application section. So here it's asking us to first install the AWS Amplify library, which we must do, and then add this configuration file to the entry point. So in our React application, the entry point is index.js file. But before copying this and pasting it in, when you look at these 3 lines of code, you can see first we import Amplify, and then we are importing AWS config from AWS export file. Now guys, this AWS export files get generated when we provision our backend using Amplify CLI. But right now we already have a backend that is configured through serverless framework. So if you click on this item, the second item, that is create or reuse existing backend. So that is what we really needed. So we already have existing backend. So there also, if you scroll a little bit down here, reuse existing authentication resource, and we get some boilerplate configuration. Let me just go ahead and just copy this because this is what we exactly need. And I will open my SRC folder. By now my React application is created, and I'll go to index.js. Let me remove these comments. Web vitals, I'll remove this one too. And then I'll paste it. Now here first we import Amplify from AWS Amplify, and then we'll configure it manually. Now here we are configuring the authentication section because we are creating the login screen, and there are some required attributes and not required attributes. For example, identity pool ID is not really a requirement for our application because we added our user groups, admin group and customer group, and associated the corresponding IAM roles at the user pool level. So we are not actually using identity pool there. So let me just take it out. Now the region is a required attribute. So if I go to the AWS console, I'm currently in North California region, that is US West 1. So let me just copy this and paste it here. Okay, region is done. I'll take out the comment. And then identity pool region is no longer required. But user pool ID is a requirement because we have a user pool. So I'll go to services and I go to Cognito. I added to favorite and go into my user pool. And in the general settings, I can pick the user pool ID, which is this one, copy, paste it here. Then we need to attach a user pool client ID as well, because from our React application we are using, or we are connecting to this user pool through the user pool client. So I'll go to app client section, and this is our client ID, paste it. And also I'll enable mandatory sign-in because I want to enforce our users to log in all the time. So let me just set it to true. Yeah. The rest of the configuration I keep it as default, not using any cookie storage, and I'm not using hosted UI. So let me just remove all these additional configuration. Alright, so this is the configuration that is required to configure authentication. Now let me remove this line of code as well. I don't need a reference to the auth config. Now, how do we make sure that this really works? Now that's where we are going to use UI React component library to add a already created login screen for application. Now, if I go to Amplify library, I can click on UI component section. Now I have selected React, so I can use UI component for React, and I will go ahead and open authentication section, and there I will use authenticator. Now this is the authenticator, guys. So this authenticator has a lot of screens already created for us, like sign up, sign in, forget password, and all this and that. So what we just have to do is install the dependency AWS Amplify UI React and also AWS Amplify, which we haven't yet installed. So let's go ahead and copy this, and I'm inside the bookstore folder, but I mean, if you are inside the front end folder, make sure you go to CD bookstore, and inside that just paste it in and hit enter. So it will install both AWS Amplify and Amplify UI React library. So until it is been installed, let's see how to use this. So there are various examples, but I like to use the higher order function. For that, just search for with authenticator. So this section. Now with authenticator is a higher order component, or HOC we call it, and we can wrap that higher order function around our app component or main app component. So what is our main app component? So here in the front end folder, bookstore, source, app.js. So this is our main app component. So let me remove this boilerplate code, and I will just first import authenticator and amplify sign out button. I will show you what exactly is that in a bit. First I import it with authenticator and amplify sign out button from UI React, which actually has got installed right away. Great. And then I will just copy these 3 lines, a div and some text in it. So I'm going to return that. I'm using amplify sign out, so this is going to give me a sign out button, and also some text so that we know I have successfully logged into my application. And then I'm going to wrap my app with authenticator HOC or higher order component. Alright, well, this should work if we have properly configured our user pool in index.js. So in order to test that, I will do yarn start to start my React app. So it's starting the development server. Okay, looks like it is compiled. We have unused variable, that's fine. And here we go. I can see the sign in screen. Now let's go ahead and sign in. So I'll use one of the already created users so that we can again verify whether it has properly connected to our existing user pool. So I'll use admin, I think it's Manoj, and the password, sign in. There we go. We got properly signed in, and this is our my app text, and this is our sign out button. And I can sign out again, and let's sign in with the user as well, user@test.com, sign in. That should also work. Great, so we have properly configured our user pool manually. Next, we need to configure our AppSync API. Now for that, I will go back to the libraries section in the Amplify documentation. I'll click here, and then I will select API, GraphQL section. I can click getting started, but here it talked about how to use Amplify CLI, but what I really want to is the reusing of existing backend. So I'll click on here, and then if I scroll down to this section, it's all about how to configure an existing AppSync API. Now let me just copy this configuration. Well, this is about using an API key, so I'm not going to use that, but if I scroll a little bit down, I should see an example configuration for Amazon Cognito user pool, because we are using Cognito user pool authentication type. So I will copy this one, and I will go to my index.js file. Now we have already configured the Amplify auth, but underneath it, I will just paste this code as well. So here we need to add the GraphQL endpoint and also the GraphQL or AppSync region, and also the AppSync authentication type, which is Amazon Cognito user pool, which is correct. Take out this comment. But we need to fill out the GraphQL URL, and the region is also not US East 1, but that is also US West 1. Okay, where to find this one? GraphQL endpoint. Well, I can actually go to AWS console and I will search, or I will go to AppSync. I will open the AppSync API and I'll go to the settings section here. Then I should see the API URL, this one. So I'll copy it. So this is the endpoint or the URL for AppSync API, and I will paste it here. Great. And this should do really. So how can we check this? Well, we actually have to make a mutation or a query just to test if everything works. So let's create a simple UI, very simple UI to run our query. Because if you remember, we already have a query. If I go to the query section, we have implemented this get book by ID query. So let's copy and book ID from our database and try to use this query. So if it returns properly all the data, then we know we have successfully created a connection from our front end to the AppSync API. So before that, let's add a small UI improvement. I will go to app.js file. So yeah, here right now it is just text, right? My app text here. But instead, I'm going to add a section, and inside this section, I will add a button, and the button value is get book details. And when we click on it, I will add an event handler for on click. When we click on it, we'll execute a method, let's say get book. Okay, and let's create that method. Now here we need to make a call to our AppSync API. So we are going to make that get book by ID query. Now in order to make a query, we are going to use another method from AWS Amplify library. So that method is, go to get started section, and here we go. So this is the import we need. So we are importing API and GraphQL operation from AWS Amplify. So up top, I will import it, and then I'm going to make an API request for our GraphQL endpoint. So it is something similar to this. So this is about creating a to-do. So it's a mutation call, but we really don't need a mutation, and it is awaiting. So let's decorate it with async. But instead of create to do, we need to get a book by its ID, and we are hard coding the book ID. So let's first get a book ID, and I will go to DynamoDB table, data source, DynamoDB, books table, items, and let's query the latest book that we created. So I'll just copy this book ID and I'll add it here for later use. Right, now we need to call upon a query. So which query are we going to call upon? It is the get book by ID query. Now in order to arrange our queries and mutations and also subscription properly, I will go ahead and create a subfolder here inside the source folder. So let's say queries, or GraphQL really, GraphQL, and inside that I will create another folder, queries. Inside the queries folder, I will create a file and I will just say book.js. So this is where I'm going to add all the book related queries. So here let's export our get book by ID query. Export const get book by ID, you can call it any name really, and then I will add template string of 2 backticks, and here I can just go to my AWS console. In the AppSync console, I can just copy the entire query object. So it's very easy. So basically you can use this AppSync interactive editor to build your query and then copy it and then come here and paste it. Okay, let's arrange it just a little bit. All right. So in this getBook query, guys, we need to pass along a book ID. I will call getBook by ID to the query name as well, and then I need to pass in the parameter. So let's add $ID, and so it is of type ID. So it is of type ID. So we will pass it from here API GraphQL as an input, and that value then we will use it inside the actual query. $ID. Okay, here I am returning author, book ID, created at, description, title. I don't need created at. I will add price, title, description. Okay, this should do. Then in my app.js file, I will import that. Import from, so I have GraphQL folder /queries/book. So what I'm going to import, that is get book by ID. So we import the query, and then I'm going to use this GraphQL operation helper function, guys. So here I will do API.GraphQL. So this is a GraphQL API request, and inside the parameters I will use this helper function GraphQL operation. So this time it is not create to do, but get book by ID. So this is a query that we want to execute. And as for the input value, so in our book.js we need to pass in this ID value. So let's add ID instead of input, and I will just paste in this hard-coded ID value. Ideally this can come from a loop also, but this is just for us to test everything works properly. And this should return actually a book. Okay, and then we'll set this book into this context. For that I will have a variable up here, not up there, but outside the getBook function, and let's use useState book variable, and this is the setter useState. The initial value is null, so useState is not here, so let's import useState as well. So once I got the book, I will set it to the book variable. Okay, and then I'd like to show that book just beneath this section. Okay, inside, or maybe inside this section, let's have a separator, HR, the horizontal separator, and then let's view it. So I'll execute another function really, that's easier for me. So I'll add a view book that will return some JSX. I will first check if there's any value in the book, because initial value is null, so we don't want to show anything if there's nothing. But as soon as we set the book value, it will not be empty. So if the book is not empty, then we will return some JSX. So I will return an article, and inside this article let's have an h3 tag. So this should give me the title of the book, because as you can remember, we have a title and we have a description. Let's have another one, this time a p tag, book.description, book.author, and finally the price. So we'll have a h4 this time, book.price. So this will display this article HTML underneath this HR tag if there's a book. So let's set a debug point, so we'll know exactly if the book is returned with the details. Okay, so let's try it out. So I don't see any issues here other than this auth. So let's get rid of that as well. So yeah, I'm not using auth. Save. Now I don't have any complaints. Good. So well, let me try to refresh. Here we go. This is the book details section, and I will go ahead and click get book details. You can see the GraphQL request is being made and it hit the debugger. If I hover over it, it has returned the book, and there's a data object, and inside the data object there's the get book ID and then the details. Well, actually what I have done here is I just assigned that set book with whatever the return value, but I actually need to go to data and dot get book ID. So let's do that. I will just copy that, otherwise it won't work. App.js, so I need to go to data and get book by ID. Now it should properly work. I will remove the debugger pointer as well. So currently it's not showing anything, but if I do a refresh and then click again, well, it's still not showing. Oh, I have to return it, basically return this article. Return. Now it should work. There we go. It printed out the book name, description, and the author and the price. So let's add a small margin here. So here I'll add a class name. Well, I will actually add that class to the section. Yeah, now it looks good. So now our front end can successfully call upon our GraphQL API and fetch data. So let's try to fetch another book. Okay, this one maybe. I just have to change the book ID. Paste. Come here, refresh it. I should now receive another book. Awesome. Alright guys, so this is how we can configure our Amplify with the existing AppSync API.